We're going to go ahead and get started. Exploiting the population. A lot of these tendencies are going to apply to like live, low to mid stakes tournament and cash games, up to like even $1,000 buy-in. I see a lot of these mistakes. Typically, I see a lot of these same mistakes in like a 3,500 WPT. So just don't think it's common that, players think as the buy-in gets higher that everyone plays better, because that's not true. So you're going to see these same mistakes from $60 daily tournaments to $3,500 WPTs. These are just very common mistakes, and even up to like 5-10 no limit cash games. When I say population, I'm referring to the average player in the pool. So you got to use your own judgment. It's not going to apply to everyone, but it's going to apply to 60, 70% of the population. Just these are things you need to be on the lookout for. So today, the goal for today is to get you to focus on identifying these situations and making the appropriate adjustments to your ranges. Also, this is what I was referring to earlier, focusing on the opposite. Put people in situations where they will exploit in the wrong directions. So what I mean by that is, for example, today we're going to talk about how people don't check raise enough. And when the population is used to not being check raised, they're going to overfold the check raises. So therefore, if we start check raising more, they're going to be their natural adjustment, which is going to be our adjustment too to most people, is going to be to check raise more and create more folding. And therefore, by check raising more, we can create, now they're overfolding to our check raise, and we are generating a lot more EV in those situations. Another key thing here is not all exploits are active. Passive exploiting is sometimes the best exploit. What I mean by passive exploiting is, so like an active exploit would be like, we're going to check raise more. A passive exploit might be, we're just going to check down because the person missed a continuation bet, and we're going to over-realize our equity now by just getting to see an extra turn card or an extra river card. So we don't have to do anything, and a lot of people feel like, oh, well, he capped his range, I need to start bluffing more. Well, a passive exploit is that, yeah, maybe he capped his range, but you're also over-realizing your equity, and you are exploiting him. He's exploiting himself by just letting you over-realize your equity that you would have just folded on the flop, and now you're gaining EV that you weren't supposed to gain. So that's what I mean by an active exploit and a passive exploit. So we'll be talking about both of those. Here is a list that I came up with. Hopefully we'll get to all of them, but we'll see how it goes. So first, raising too wide in early position, too tight in late position. Continuation betting, both over and under continuation betting. Under check raising, bet sizing, and value to bluff frequency. Don't turn weak showdown value hands into bluffs. Don't adjust the big blind defense to raise sizings or position. 4-bet bluffing, only 3-bet bluffing, or only 3-betting premium holdings. Don't bet thin enough for value. And then I kind of threw it out there in the end. We'll talk about it if we get to it. Overvaluing tournament life. So we're just going to go through any of these. It's going to be kind of a wordier PowerPoint. There's going to be a lot of writing on there. But as always, ask any questions while we're on the topic. It will be easier to talk about it while we're still on that topic. I have some examples that we'll go through. But please ask as many questions as need be. The questions really help, making sure I'm getting through the point that I want to get through. So first, let's get started. Let's talk about raising too wide in early position and too tight in late position. These are the very, very common mistakes that I see everyone making. They raise way too wide in early position and raise way too tight in late position. So first, raising too wide in early position. EP, early position, 9-handed with 100 big blinds deep. You should be raising probably about 14% with antes. It's really hard to adjust to be much wider than that, even at a soft table, because you still have 8 people left to act. And I've actually experimented now, like my adjustment will be, if it's a really soft table, I'll still be around 14%, maybe 15%, but I'll actually start limping a little bit in early position at really soft tables. And I'm limping a very specific range of like small pairs, weak suited aces, hands that play really well multi-way and that make really strong hands that can play big pots. So I want to like limp my ace six of hearts or something in early position rather than raise it, because when you raise people flat and you play a lot of multi-way pots, it's really hard to win these multi-way pots from early position. But limping the ace six of hearts, I let people over limp smaller flush cards so I can flush over flush people. Or, I'm limping probably, deuces through sixes, maybe even sevens. And I'm, playing hands that can make sets and win big pots as well. And this is like an adjustment I'll make at really soft tables, because no one's going to be able to recognize. And even if there's one or two players that do recognize what I'm doing, it's really hard for them to exploit it when they have 7 other players at the table. So this exploit is kind of a passive exploit in terms of when you see other people raising too wide in early position, they're hurting themselves and they're playing too many marginal hands from out of position if they're raising more than like a 14% range. When you do have, play your kind of normal ranges against them, you're going to have a severe range advantages and punish them on more flops. The one adjustment I would make is you can 3-bet more when you're in late position or in the blinds. Just add more bluff combos to your range. But do not start 3-betting more from earlier middle position to these loose openers. Because if you start 3-betting more from earlier middle position versus the EP, you're kind of making the same mistake they are by just playing too many hands with too many players left to act. So, like I said, this is kind of a passive exploit that they're just going to be playing too many minus EV hands. And most of your active exploiting is going to be from later positions. So when you're in the cutoff, the button, small blind, and big blind, when there's less people that act behind you, then you can start 3-betting more against these early position people that are raising too wide. And then raising too tight in late position, mostly the hijack, cutoff, and button. You should adjust your ranges like crazy. There's spots where I'm going to have 60 to 70% button open against really tight big blinds. I'm normally around 50% from the button. Players don't 3-bet wide enough versus late position open, so you're going to over-realize your equity. That's why you can open more hands. And since they're not 3-betting as much pre, you can just really open up your ranges. So I'm going to show you something really quick. This is a program called Poker Snowy. Really cool. I wouldn't call it like a GTO solver thing like Pio Solver, but it's an AI computer poker program where you can play against it, or you can put in scenarios and it will generate like pre-flop ranges for you. And these ranges are based off, like, whenever you play on it, it learns, and the database of all the people playing against it, it's learned to play pretty optimal ranges. So I'm just going to show you kind of what its opening EP ranges and what its button ranges, just to kind of show you guys how tight you should be from early position. So this is 10-handed, so I'm going to have this player fold here. This is the scenarios tab. So this is one of the cool things from it. So I did 1-2 no limit, 100 big blinds with a 10% ante. So it's a little more than a 1 big blind ante. But what we're going to do here, this is kind of the cool thing. So this is the under the gun player at a 9-handed table. We're going to do analyze tools, pre-flop advice. And this is the range that it suggests raising from early position, all these green hands. The ones with numbers are like, it would raise pocket 9s like 73% of the time, pocket 8s 86. It does some weird things like that. But I raise a little wider. I raise wider than this, but this is it playing against really aggressive 3-betters and stuff. So like no ace 7 suited, no ace 6 suited, no ace deuce suited. And it's a pretty tight range. Like this is ace jack off or better, 8s or better, and just the stronger suited aces. So this is a really, really tight range. And you can get away a little bit wider than this because people don't 3-bet enough. But I just wanted to put this up there to show you how tight like a solver kind of plays from early position. Now, in contrast, let's look at the button. So I'm going to have this player fold, and we get to the button now. And we will do the same thing. Pre-flop advice. You can change its raise sizing. So half pot would be like 4.5. This would be a $7 raise. We'll just do like a 4.5, or I think this is going to be like $5, right around that, just under 5 for the half pot. And just look how wide this is. This is like a probably pretty close to a 50% range. Every suited king, most of the suited queens. Folding just the suited or junk. It's folding deuces. I would raise that. Just the reason it's folding deuces because of the blockers. But this is a really wide range, and a lot of people aren't raising this wide. So you can kind of tighten up out of the blinds, 3-bet a little bit less. Just pay attention to position and realize that most people don't raise wide enough in late position, and they raise way too wide in early position. And that's going to kind of cover it for EP in late position, raised first in. Again, they're kind of passive exploits, but just keep in mind that, when you're in the big blind and the button's not raising wide enough, you're over-realizing your equity because you don't have to fold now 40% of the time or 30% of the time. So you're exploiting without really doing too much actively. If there's no questions on that one, we'll go ahead and move along to continuation betting. 2 slides here. First, we're going to talk about over continuation bet. And a lot of players blind continuation bet regardless of nut or range advantage. I've done a lot of webinars with you guys on range advantage and nut advantage and how it affects your continuation bet range. And there's a lot of players that are just trained from, 2007. It's, you got to continue your story and bet aggressively on the flop because you bet aggressively pre-flop. Another thing is they're kind of exploiting the population themselves. Sorry. The reason they are continuation blind is because they are not used to getting check raised and learn to just bet every flop. So the population, which is our next slide, is going to under check raise, and this kind of leads to everyone over continuation betting because they're not getting check raised. And so the exploit and what you need to be doing is more so you just need to meet the minimum check raise frequencies. And a lot of times on flops when they're betting a third pot, depending on the texture and everything, you're supposed to be check raising anywhere from like 12% of the time to like upwards of 20% of the time. And no one is check raising anywhere between 12 and 20% of the time. And so I didn't put exploit here, but other than the obvious draws, start check raising more bottom pair hands with bad kickers. So if you were on last webinar or 2 webinars, we talked about like on the ace-7 deuce, the big blind versus early position does a lot of check raising with hands like deuce 3, deuce 4, deuce 5 with backdoor flush draws, hands like 7-6 and 7-5. On this ace-7-5 board, a hand like 5-4 suited or 5-3 suited or 7-6 suited or 5-8 suited, cards that kind of wrap around the 7 or the 5 or the wheel draw with a pair. And these weak pairs work great against overseas bettors because, one, they fold out six out overcard hands. So check raising like the 7-6 is going to fold out hands like king queen, king jack, jack 10, queen jack, all those hands that have 6 outs against you. 2, you have 5 clean outs normally to improve. So you have 5 outs that are going to be really clean. That's why we kind of do it with the bad kickers. We're not doing it with king 7 because then they can improve on the king as well when we make 2 pair, and it's hard for us to go crazy. But on these smaller cards, when we have 7-6 and the turns of 6 on ace-7-6, we're most likely have the best hand always. And third, they block the strong value 2 pair and sets from our opponent. So we block hands like the 7-6 here. We block ace-7 suited from our opponent. We block pocket 7s. And those are 2 of the stronger hands that they're going to have on this board. So look to check raise a lot of like more of these weak pairs with like backdoor straight draws and backdoor flush draws. And you want to do it on boards where there's a large gap between top pair and second pair. So on both these boards, ace-7-5, the same would be on king 5-4. You don't need to do it as much. Like on king jack 5, it's the same thing. You can do it on a 5x board to fold out like their 7-6 suited, 8-7 suited, 9-10 suited, but you don't do it as much on like say king jack 9 because then there's not that huge gap and you're not folding out a bunch of 6-outers on the king jack 9. But on say ace queen deuce, if you do it with deuce 3, deuce 4, deuce 5 suited, if you defend those hands in the big blind, then you're folding out all the 6-out draws between bottom pair and second pair. So Taylor asks, after check raise these flops and bottom pair, do you barrel the turn? So like on the ace, we're going to basically, sorry, I hit the microphone. We're going to keep barreling on cards that are better for our range and not. So in a basic sense, on the ace-7 deuce board, when we get called, I'm going to give up on cards like a 10 or higher and pretty much barrel on any cards like 8 or lower. And the reason is because the types of hands that I listed that we're going to check raise are going to more hit the bottom half of the deck. And the types of hands that they're going to call or check raise are going to hit the top half of the deck. So he's going to call with hands like ace-10, ace-jack, ace-queen, ace-king, etc. So we don't want to barrel under those cards where he's making more 2 pairs. But we will barrel the deuce-3 on like a 6, to fold out hands like 8s through jacks now or 8s through kings. And so the lower half of the deck, those are the cards we'd be bluffing. And would you barrel on another ace? I probably wouldn't barrel another ace because the ace is going to be a really good card for the opponent because we're not really check raising a lot of aces. The only aces we're going to check raise are like ace-7, ace-deuce, and then maybe like ace-queen or ace-jack. But the in-position player is going to call with all his aces. So when the ace comes, like his range is going to contain a lot more aces once he calls our check raise. So we're going to be giving up on a lot of the aces. But for example, on the 7, we can kind of go crazy on the 7 because he doesn't have many 7s. If it's an early position raise, for example, he doesn't raise a lot of 7s from early position. So the middle and the bottom card would be much pairing. Good questions for those. Keep them coming. Now let's talk about under continuation betting. So other players severely under continuation bet, mostly on boards that should be range bet. So when I say range bet, it's you should bet without any, you should bet with every single hand in your range. So if you're at my webinar, I can't remember if it was last week or 2 weeks ago. It was last week, I believe. We talked about the ace-7 deuce rainbow from early position. We talked about early position versus big blind range betting the flop. So as we discussed last time, the early position player is supposed to bet 100% of the time from early position versus like a big blind defend on ace-7 deuce. And the reason is they have like a massive 67% range advantage. And you're supposed to bet hands like 8s, 9s, 10s, jacks, just because the big blind's going to fold. They can't defend enough. And against players who check back, it's a passive exploit. You simply are going to over-realize your equity with hands like Jack-10 or King-Queen or 8-9, all these hands that would fold to the continuation bet. Now you get to see another card and see if you make a pair or whatever. And you don't want to start over-bluffing because these checkbacks, it's the reason you want a 100% range bet is because it's really easy to range you when you check back. So when someone checks back this ace-7 deuce from early position, I'm immediately putting them on like weak aces. So like hands like ace-3, ace-4, ace-5 suited, maybe ace-8 suited, ace-9. And then they have like jacks, queens, kings, 10s, 9s. It's really easy to range them. And it makes it really easy to play against. So, and if you're going to bet into them, you're going to be very polar and using huge sizings. So that range I just said, if I am going to bet, I'm not going to bet very often because I'm just going to passively exploit them by just over-realizing my equity. But when I do, like if I have an ace-queen or something and they check back, I'm going to start betting like 1.5x pot. And I can start bluffing to, the correct number of combos to balance that with my hands like 5-4 suited or 3-4 suited on this ace-7 deuce, or maybe like the deuce-3 or deuce-4, hands that have 5 clean outs against those jacks through kings. That would be how I would both passively and actively exploit these people that really check back with a very, very, very specific range on boards that should be 100% range bet. So against good players, you really don't want to miss your range bets because it's so easy to range you and play properly. This has to go with, some of the stuff will overlap because we already talked about it, but the next one is under check raising. So people severely under check raise, like I said, depending on board texture, it can be anywhere from like a 10% to a 20% check raise frequency that you're supposed to have from the big blind. they miss, when defending from the big blind, one of the key parts is people miss thin value check raises with strong top pairs. So people are really scared to check raise with a hand like king queen on king 8-4 or ace jack on ace 7 deuce. And these are definitely a thing, and especially against when people are betting really small in the flop and range betting, you should be making some thin value check raises with your stronger top pair hands. And then for the same thing I talked about before, like the 5-4 here on ace 5 deuce, you should be check raising for its kind of value, protection. You'll bluff later on. There's a lot of good properties for check raising, like a hand like 5-4, 5-3, even 6-5 on this ace 5 deuce board. So those are two kind of categories of hands that people really miss. That makes up like a decent percentage of their check raising range. Another one is they miss boards with a massive nut advantage when deep stacked. So in this example, early position range raises, you defend in the big blind, and the flop comes 6-5-4 rainbow. If in position starts over c-betting on this board, you can just go bananas check raising here. Your opponent might have 8-7 suited, and they might have 6s, 5s, and 4s. But you have 3 deuce suited, you can have 8-7 off, you can have 8-7 suited, pocket 4s, pocket 5s, pocket 6s, 6-5 off, 5-4 off. You have so many combos of 2 pairs, sets, straights. You can go crazy because the EP, if they start over c-betting, has too many broadways that miss, and they have over pairs that are going to be put into really tough bluff catching spots. So these low boards where you have a massive nut advantage, deep stack, you don't necessarily need to have a range advantage. But if you have a huge nut advantage when you're deep stacked, you can go really crazy on them. Jason asks, isn't ace jack on ace 7 deuce kind of a marginal made hand? Yes, of course it is. It's definitely a very thin and marginal made hand. But you got to think of their range too. They're going to have a lot of suited aces you get value from. They're going to have ace 3, ace 4, ace 5. They're going to have ace 8 suited, ace 9 suited, ace 10 suited, ace jack suited. Yeah, they can have ace queen or ace king, but they have pocket 7s. They're probably not raising deuces from early position. They might not raise ace deuce suited. So there's not a lot of hands they have. The only hands they really have that beat ace jack are pocket 7s, ace 7 suited, maybe ace deuce suited, maybe pocket deuces. So, and then ace queen and ace king. But they have a lot of hands that are going to call your check raise at least once, like 8s through kings. You can have like any 7. If they have like a 7-8 suited, 9-7 suited, possibly you're going to call your raise. And on this ace jack board also, these king queens and ace jacks, they're going to be a hand that you can check raise on the flop. And when they call, depending on the card, maybe you bet again. But you can also check them again on the turn. And now you have a bluff catching hand on a spot where you would like when you check raise, say when we check raise 4-5 suited or deuce 5 suited, like we've said before, and then the turn is a king. Now if you check raise ace jack, you have a hand that you can check call with and then give up with your deuce 5 suited. So it kind of helps to have some of these thin value hands. Don't need to do them all the time, but against sticky players, you definitely are going to get value from your hand. Players slow play too much. This is something I see a lot. They slow play. They just flat with like 8s on 8-5 deuce. People do not barrel aggressively enough to justify protecting your range on the flop. So because people don't barrel aggressively enough, you should just check raise your really strong hands on the flop and try to get money in before, because it's a disaster when you have 8s and the guy has pocket 10s and then an ace rolls off on the turn. Or a king, he has pocket kings and an ace rolls off. You're just giving up so much value by not trying to pile in a lot of money on the flop against people that don't barrel aggressively enough. And then also on the under check raise part, on the turn, people are even tighter. Turn check raises are almost always nutted. You can make really tight folds on the turn to check raises, even with really weak 2 pairs. Strong top pairs you can start folding because people's turn check raises are just always nutted. Recognize equity shifts when you turn lots of 2 pairs or straight that your opponent doesn't. So we talked about this last time when we analyze early position versus big blind play and equity shifts after it goes bet, check, call. Realize when you turn a lot of 2 pairs in straights and your opponent does not, you can start check raising the turn aggressively on turns that improve your range and not your opponent's. And you should generate a decent amount of fold equity because people don't see many turn check raises. And like whenever I see them, I just kind of assume a lot of time that they have it because people don't check raise the turn. They just check call. All right, this is a big one. Bet sizing and value to bluff frequency. So players over bluff with small sizings and under bluff with large sizings, in my experience. So first, let's go over some math. When you bet full pot, you give your opponents 2-to-1 odds on the call. So there's 1 unit in the pot. You put 1 unit in as the bet, so they have to call 1 unit to win 2 units. So when you give 2-to-1 odds on your opponent's call, that's how your value to bluff ratio, like on the river, it gets a little more complicated on earlier streets, but on the river, you should have 2 value hands for every 1 bluff. When you bet 1/3 pot, you give your opponent 4-to-1 odds. Now you should have 4 value hands for every 1 bluff. So you don't need a bluff very often. In my experience, players greatly over bluff using the small sizings, and they severely under bluff using the large sizings. So the bluff to value frequency is directly coded. We talked about that. So here you should be calling lots of 3rd and 4th pairs to these small sizings, these 1/3 pot sizings on the river, the block bets. You should be calling really wide against population because they tend to over bluff using these small sizings. They have the mindset, oh, I want to make it look like a value bet, so they start bluffing. And they're scared to bluff really big. They don't bluff enough with the full pots or when they bet really large with a polarized range. They under bluff. And the reason is because they move a lot of their bluffs into this really small sizing. So you can start over folding even really strong top pairs to these large sizings because it doesn't take much of them under bluffing for you to be able to fold really strong hands on the river because they're not bluffing enough. In general, I fold a lot of a huge chunk of my bluff catchers to people that I don't think bluff enough. And you should really just be only calling with hands that beat value hands. And you're going to be doing probably better as an exploit than if you call it the proper frequency. So, against large sizings, polar ranges, start overfolding to larger sizings with hands that don't beat hands that they're value betting. And on the turn, this applies on the turn as well. You can start folding these strong, weak top pairs, marginal top pairs on the turn to aggressive bets for the same reason. Kind of a counter exploit as well. Players tend to overfold to small block bets. And so I personally overbluff with the small sizing because people aren't calling with 3rd and 4th pairs or ace highs like they should be. And so I definitely personally overbluff against population using these small block sizings on the river, like 1/3 and quarter pot bets, because people tend to just vastly overfold to them because they don't see people. They think it's like a value bet, basically, in my experience of playing. So I tend to overbluff and give myself really, really, really good odds on my bluffs on the small sizings, and then definitely be overfolding to polar large sizings on the river. Any questions on the bet size and the value frequency? And just realizing here, the key thing is kind of the math part, realizing the correlation between the pot odds you give your opponent and your value to bluff frequency on the river. They don't turn weak showdown hands into a bluff. And this is kind of the quote I hear at the table all the time. What bluffs could you have? Everything got there. Oftentimes, weak pocket pairs or bottom pairs will end up making up a lot of your bluffing range because everything else made pretty strong showdown value. So kind of the example I came up with was you raise in middle position versus the big blind, and the board runs out ace, queen, jack, 10-5. And this is a board I see vastly under bluffed by players. It's hard to find the correct number of bluffs for your large amount. You have a large amount of king X hands, large amount of, you have sets, strong 2 pairs that you want to value bet. And so hands like deuces, 3s, 4s, 6s, also hands like 5X, hands like 5-6 suited that block river, ace 5. These are the types of hands you're going to be bluffing with a lot. Also hands like 10-9 or jack-9 do a good job of blocking 2 pair calls and also block 9-8 from your opponent's range. So kind of a key rule here is think about what hands is your opponent folding to your bet. Don't have those cards in your hand. What cards is your opponent calling with, and have those cards in your hand. Now here, your opponent's going to call with a king a lot or 2 pair. So it's hard. You can't have a king in your hand and be bluffing. But you think about what types of cards would they have with their king. So hands like king jack, hands like king queen, possibly. So maybe turn a weak queen into a bluff. But I want to show a hand, and I don't know if this is the best example, but I was playing online before this webinar and had this hand up that was kind of I thought a pretty good example of what I was talking about here. This is a multi-way pot, so it's a little different. Hold on, let me. So under the gun raises to 450. I'm in the small blind. Pretty weak player, so I flatten the small blind. The big blind comes king 10-6 with 2 clubs. He goes check, check, check. Turn is a queen. Pretty standard here with deuces. I'm going to check again. It's a really good card for under the gun's range. I'm at a pretty big range advantage, so I don't think I have any leads here. And it goes check, check, check again. And the river is a 7, and deuces are pretty much never winning at showdown here. But it's pretty hard for me to find bluffs here. I don't really want to bluff with an ace in my hand because I want to fold out hands like, ace 10, ace 6, those types of hands. And, maybe I'm trying to think in the small blind if there's any like a 9X or an 8X hand, but probably the only ones I would have would be 9-8 suited that just made a straight, and pocket 8s and pocket 9s, which are probably too strong to bluff with. I decided to bluff here with deuces, and what I'm trying to accomplish here is fold out 3s, 4s, 5s, fold out 8-7 suited, fold out 10-9 suited, fold out. I don't beat ace 9 suited. I already beat ace 9 suited, but if I check, there's a good chance that a hand like ace 9 suited or ace 8 suited might bluff themselves, and I'm not going to call with deuces. So even though I beat those hands, it prevents me from getting bluffed. And I just think if I check here with deuces, I win the pot 0% of the time. And when I can win the pot here 0% of the time, I think this is kind of one of these marginal made hands that I thought that it's a spot where it's tough to find a lot of bluffs, and a lot of times your small pocket pairs are the ones that you start to bluff with here. And I can get here, I can get the big blind to fold pretty much every 6 and every 7, and under the gun then maybe I get here 6-5 suited from the big blind to fold and 10-9 suited from the under the gun player to fold, possibly, just because it's a spot where people aren't used to seeing bluffs. Now it's a little different because it's multi-way. I have a little less fold equity, but this is kind of a spot I thought that resembled turning these weak showdown hands, and this is a 0 showdown hand pretty much, into a bluff on the river. And a lot of times when people aren't capable of turning a pair into a bluff, they're just going to be vastly under bluffing. So pay attention to that as you're playing, for people to be turning weak or marginal made hands into a bluff, because that is a good indication if they are able to meet proper bluffing frequencies to go along with their value bets. This is a good one too, and we will use Poker Snowy again to identify this. People don't adjust big blind defense ranges. So your big blind defense range should be vary greatly based on both the sizing of the pre-flop raise and the position of the opponent. I'm going to show this in Poker Snowy in a second, but in general, you defend very wide versus min raises, and you defend very tight against 3x raises. So as an exploit, you can kind of up your raise sizings when deep, as players will be making larger mistakes, calling too many hands from the big blind. Passive exploit, players often defend the same range versus an under the gun as they do against players defend the same range from the big blind a lot of the times against an under the gun range as they do against a cutoff range, which is not correct either. So I'm going to show you in Poker Snowy just kind of what they use as like a big blind defense. So what we're going to do here is go here. So we're going to go back to this scenario with this under the gun player, and we're just going to have a min raise here from the under the gun player to $4. So I wanted to show you the big blind defense range for this that Poker Snowy suggests. So we're going to go pre-flop advice. And this is how wide it's showing. Basically, all these numbers are percentages of the time that it would 3-bet. So it's doing a lot of kind of mixing of 3-bets here a little bit. But essentially, it calls every single suited one, calls all the weak offsuit aces, folds a lot of the offsuit junky stuff still to the min raise. So I always see people defending king 8, king 7, king 6 off. These are folds even to a min raise versus early position. Hands like jack 7 off, 10-7 off. These suited 2 and 3 gappers, pretty much the offsuit 1 gappers is the cutoff, 8-6, 7-5. But this is against a min raise. Now, what I want to counter that with is we're going to go back, and now we're going to have this player raised to $6 instead of $4. So 3x raised. We're going to go to the big blind here, and we're going to go pre-flop advice. And you saw how wide it was before, and look at how much it's tightened up its range versus the 3x. Now, this is a little tighter than I would expect, but the key things that I agree with are the offsuit aces are completely gone. Even the offsuit 9s are gone. I would defend like the offsuit 10s here and queen jack off. And I would definitely defend more like suited kings and queens and some of the better like jack 7 suited, the ones that can make it straight. But you're starting to fold a lot more of the suited junk. And the key thing to recognize here is how much tighter it's playing against a 3x raise than it is against a 2x range. And it definitely, your pot odds are greatly affected. You can't defend as wide. And this is the kind of adjustment that I think people are definitely not making. They defend the same versus no matter the raise size, they defend the same hands. Now I want to show you against the same 2 sizes as a button open. So I'm going to do this. Now we're going to have this player fold. We're going to go to the button, and we're going to raise the button to $4. And small blind folds, and this is the advice for the min raise. It's defending pretty much any 2 cards against the min raise. Roberto asked, was it 3-betting offsuit aces at some frequency? Yeah, it was definitely 3-betting some of the offsuit aces at some frequency, and it's just doing Poker Snowy in general 3-bets a ton against 3x sizings and barely ever 3-bets against min raises. So it's kind of protects his range. And I don't do a lot of that offsuit ace 3-betting with the weak offsuit aces, but it is a thing. I prefer to do a lot more suited stuff, and it's doing it because it's going to fold a lot to the 3-bet, I think. And so you're generating a lot of folds having an ace in your hand. I don't recommend that personally. But yeah, it's just doing it for the blocker. The blocker effects of having the ace in its hand, basically. That's why it was 3-betting some of those hands. And they have like equity, you know, against like a lot of the calling ranges can be like 9s, 10s, jacks, queens and stuff, and you have an overcard. So it's just using a super, super polar 3-betting range. I think it might have just been, or no, it wasn't just aces. It was just aces versus the min raise. But anyways, The key thing here is against a button, it's defending almost any 2 cards. Now, I'm not going to defend any 2 cards, but that's the type of thing. Against a bad player on the button that's opening really wide, that doesn't play aggressively enough post-flop, you can get away defending almost any 2 against a min-raise. And then let's back it up, and I'll get to the questions really quick. Let's go to versus a 3x. So it was defending almost any 2 cards before. Now let's go to the 3x, and it's definitely tightened up a lot, and it starts 3-betting a lot more. And so starts 3-betting more because you're getting a worse price pre-flops, and there's more money in the pot to take down. That's why you start seeing more linear 3-betting, and you start to fold the offsuit junkier hands, and you fold a lot more of this offsuit stuff. So against the min raise on the button, you can defend almost all this offsuit junk, but against the 3x, you fold a ton of it. So that's kind of what I'm trying to get across of how much the raise size and the position greatly affect your defending range from the big blind. Got some questions. Got that one already. Taylor, good question, asks, how does defend range adjust as pot becomes more multi-way? And I don't know if I talked about this yet in the way. I think people make huge mistakes defending multi-way. And they call wider because they are getting a better price. But I actually think they're supposed to call tighter because your pot share and your equity realization is so much lower multi-way. And so you just need to be, I would call a lot of suited hands, but the offsuit junk hands go to trash. So let's see what Poker Snowy says. Let's go, let's see the cutoff open. Let's see the cutoff open to 6, the button flat 6, and then let's see what it says for the big blind. So yeah, this is a perfect example of what I would talk about. Now, let's ignore it's 3-betting, like it's squeezing a pretty linear range here, but look how tight, like it's folding ace-9 off. It's folding king 10 off, queen 10 off, jack 10 off. It's folding a lot of the junkier suited stuff. Now, I'm not going to copy blind this range or anything, but just note how much tighter like this range is cut off, button flat than it was against the button open. The button was still, defending a lot of, aces and still a lot more suited stuff. So the range definitely tightened up a lot. And it's pretty much only defending like the suited stuff and the suited stuff that can only make a straight, like 9-6 suited. It's not defending 9-5, 9-4 suited. So multi-way, you have to be really, really careful because your pot share and equity realization go down a lot. Now let's look more if we do like an early position raise. So this is the great thing about like Poker Snowy is you can just model all these situations, and it does post-flop stuff too, and you can do multi-way stuff like. You can't do, you can only do heads up spots in the Pio Solver, but Poker Snow, you can kind of play around a little bit with multi-way. It's not the most accurate, but it gives you an idea. So let's do a normal raise size to like 5, and then we're going to do, this player's range should be really tight. So let's look at his flatting range. Like it's really tight, like ace queen suited, ace jack suited, king jack suited, pocket queens, to pocket 8s. Some suited connectors. So a really tight flatting range right here. And then now let's see what the big blind defense range is. And as you can see, like these are the key ones I want to point out. Ace 10 off, king 10 off, queen 10 off, jack 10 off, all folds. They are crushed not only by this player's range, they are crushed by this really, really tight opening range that we talked about. All the pocket pairs, the range didn't change much from the cutoff and the button. Few less offsuit or hands, but the suited hands are basically ones that are either king or ace high, and they can make a straight. So they're like 5-8 suited. So suited 2 gappers, and then all this low stuff that doesn't. You can call really wide with this lower stuff because you don't connect with either player's range, right? So they didn't have a lot of low cards in your range, so your 2 pairs are pretty live when you hit the low cards on these boards. So, yeah, great question from Taylor on the multi-way defense. And the multi-way defense there, that's another big mistake that people are making. But there's not a lot you can do about it. It's a passive exploit. You're just gaining a lot more EV. Because when this player calls too wide, he's losing money. It just gets split between these two players, and mostly to player 7 because he has the stronger range. So this player is just going to be getting more EV out of this pot. And that can lead to, that's why I 3-bet a lot less when there's a really weak player in the big blind. And it doesn't even have to be a weak player, but players that like, you're flatting hands like king, queen, and king, jack off even go way up in value when the big blind is going to overdefend like king 8 off and king 7 off. And a lot of players will overdefend and call this like king 8 off here in the big blind. And that just makes the value of flatting hands that dominate that go up. So I'm not flatting king, queen off here in player 7 spot, but if I'm on the button, you know, the value of the flat goes up, not because of this player's range, but because of the big blind's range. So that was a good, something I didn't plan on talking about, but that was a really good topic that is really important. 4-bet bluffing. Players significantly under 4-bet bluff. They tend to call 3-bets or fold the 3-bets unless they have queens or better. So as an exploit, use a linear 3-betting range instead of a polar 3-betting range when players don't 4-bet bluff enough. So having a wider 3-bet value range, since you are not worried about being blown off your equity. So as an exploit, it is okay to 3-bet fold a value hand against someone with both of these properties, a low 4-bet percentage and a low fold to 3-bet percentage, which is most people that we're talking about, the population. They have a very low 4-bet percent and they have a low fold to 3-bet. So they like to call 3-bets and see flops. So hands like 9s, 10s, king, queen suited, ace, jack suited can gain lots of value by 3-betting and are simply crushed by the queens plus 4-bet range. So you can 3-bet fold those hands against people with these two properties, and it will probably outperform calling when they have both properties, low 4-bet percentage and a low 3-bet percentage. You definitely want to shift to a linear range, and I'll show you some equities really quick. Another exploit, 4-bet a bit more frequently. People have tight 3-bet ranges in general, but they also make really tight folds. So 4-betting some hands like king jack suited or queen jack suited or ace 9 suited, ace 8, like having a good blocker, king 10 suited, it may outperform calling against tight ranges. And we'll see again with the equities I'm about to show you. While they might not fold pre-flop, they play very fit or fold on the flop. So making 4-bets with these types of hands that most people just call with, sometimes you can definitely generate folds, especially against people that have like some linear 3-betting ranges. So I'm going to show you in Equilab really quick what I'm talking about with the 4-bet bluffing. So no, that was my earlier. I was doing some study. All right. So I don't know why this is doing this. All right, it's coming back. It's because I'm recording, I think. Anyways, first let's look at a hand like king, queen suited. So we're going to look at king, queen suited here. And I want to look at a range that calls the 3-bet of like ace queen, like the 4-bet queens plus. They never fold any pocket pair to the 3-bet. They always call these suited broadways. They never fold those hands. They call a lot of these suited aces. They call some of these suited 9s, suited connectors, ace jack, king queen. So king queen suited. Equity here, heads up, against this range that I just put in of like all the pairs, suited broadways, like a pretty standard calling range, is 50%. So you have a small equity advantage. Let's look at a hand like ace queen suited. Like this is going to be a pretty big range advantage. So you have like a 60% range advantage. Let's look at like a hand like pocket 10s. you have a 66%. So like tens here is like printing money if you're getting called here, 3-betting for value. Yeah, I miss pocket threes here in this range, but it won't make any difference on the range. It's so few combos, it won't make a difference. So the key thing I'm trying to point here is now that pocket tens, you get a lot of value here. 66% equity when you get called by the 3-bet. Let's look at the 4-bet range. So if they only 4-bet with queens, kings, aces, and ace, king, you only have 36% equity. So you need to be getting roughly 2-1 on your money for a break-even call. And if we take out like ace, king off, because people don't 4-bet wide enough. If we take out just ace, king off, it's queens plus ace, king suited. Now you have 25% equity with pocket tens. It just goes down a lot. And let's even look at like another hand like ace, queen suited, which is like a really strong hand. Like you have 27%. Ace, queen off is even going to be worse than this. Like 23%. Yeah, so you have 23%. So the point I'm trying to make is how much equity you have with these kind of middling value 3-bet hands, like ace jack suited, ace queen against the calling range, but how poor your equity is against the 4-bet range. And it's perfectly fine to 3-bet fold these hands against players that don't 4-bet bluff. The problem is when they do start, most people, let's take a look at a hand like ace queen suited. So against this range, we had 27%, but let's give them a different 4-bet range. So we're ace king, a more balanced range like jacks plus, and then we'll give him a couple of suited aces, a couple of suited connectors. Maybe he does like a king 10 suited or king 9 suited. I like 4-betting those hands. So now against this range, ace queen suited has 45% equity. So it would be a disaster to 3-bet fold ace queen suited when your opponent is 4-betting this range. But it's perfectly fine to 3-bet fold the ace queen suited against a person who is only 4-betting this range. So that's the key point that I'm trying to take away here is recognize how they structure their 4-betting ranges and learn how to use more linear 3-betting against those people. David says, at my level, small stakes, $300 or less, you almost never see 4-bet bluffs. I completely agree, David. I have started 4-betting light some. I'm a 60-year-old guy, and they may call my 4-bet, but will almost fold the flop. That's exactly what I was talking about. 4-betting these hands like this, if they're not 3-bet bluffing, or, they might not fold the flop or fold pre, but they're going to fold the flop with all their ace kings and ace queens and ace jacks unless they improve. And you always have, and he said they always say you have aces or kings, and that's what they're used to seeing. And the reason they always say that is because that's what the population does. So, David, that's my exact point of what I'm talking about here with the 4-betting and etc. So we're going to move a little bit quicker. So same concept here, but when players only 3-bet premiums, you need to start overfolding hands like jack 10 suited, queen jack suited, king queen suited. So king queen suited, king jack, queen jack suited go way down in value against these players that are only 3-betting like 5% of the time and only the best hands. So what David was talking about in his $300 cash games, when they only have the nuts when they 3-bet, hands like king jack go way down in values. They're always dominated by their opponent's 3-betting range. So your exploit is to call 3-bets like with hands like small pairs and suited connectors, mostly like under a 9 because you don't want to connect with the range. So hands like 7-6 suited, 5-6 suited, even 5-4 suited. These maybe 5-4 suited is not even a great one because you need an ace a lot of times to flop a wheel draw or something. These hands are not dominated by the 3-betting range and have more equity than hands like jack 10 suited or queen jack suited. They're easily dominated by the tight range. Extra players are super tight 3-betting from the big blind, so this is even more pronounced. They often don't balance their ranges. So the exploit is to overfold to 3-bets from tight players from the big blind and only call with like hands that don't connect with their range. So same thing. We're going to give a range here of... So I'm going to give us Queen Jack suited, really pretty hand, right? We open and we get 3-bet by the nit. And the nit only has aces, kings, queens, jacks, and ace king. Our equity against this range with Queen Jack suited is 29%. Really bad. Let's look at what we have with 7-6 suited, though. So 29% is not going to be enough equity probably to call the 3-bet preflop. You're most likely just going to be better off folding. But let's say you have 7-6 suited. You have pretty much the same equity with 7-6 suited as you do with Queen Jack suited. And even more so like a hand like pocket fives, you're going to have a lot more equity because that's a pair. But yeah, you have 33%. King Queen suited, it's going to have pretty poor equity. Might have a little. It's going to have a little more because you have overcards to jacks. Let's say I take out pocket jacks just to kind of exemplify the point here. King Queen suited has 25% equity against a range of queens plus an ace king. Against a player that's only 3-betting the really, really strong hands, 3% of their hands, you know, King Queen suited is not performing very well, but a hand like 7-6 suited is probably going to have more equity. Yeah, you have 31% with 7-6 suited and 25% with King Queen suited. So call more with like the small pairs, small suited connectors, and you want to fold hands like Jack 10 suited and Queen Jack suited to these people that are only 3-betting the premiums because you're dominated by their range. A couple more here, and then we're going to wrap it up. They don't bet thin for value on the river. When players don't bet thin for value, they end up with polar ranges using unpolar sizings. So with good blockers, it becomes very easy to bluff catch against these players. It's also very easy for them to be over bluffing as they give you a better price with their smaller sizes. So remember what I talked about earlier. When you bet full pot, you need to have one bluff for every 2 value hands. And when you bet half pot, you need to have, you're giving them 3-1, so three value hands to 1 bluff. Now, what players end up doing when they don't bet thin for value is they have the same range that they would bet full pot with, like strong top pairs, and maybe they use the correct amount of bluffs, but they size down and they give you a better price, and it becomes really easy to bluff catch against these players. And the point of a polar range is not to make more money from you. Like, you make more money because you can bet bigger, but only because you make a lot more money with your bluffs. That's kind of how a polar range works, and it makes all of the bluff catchers 0 EV. But the bluff catchers, the EV goes up when they start using a lot of really small sizing. It becomes much easier to bluff catch against when you're using small sizings when they could easily be using like a 1.5x pot, like 1.5x pot, and now they're using a half pot sizing. So as an exploit, you can bluff catch lots of second and third pairs against players that don't value bet thin because they're repping, they don't have these thin value bets, and they end up with a polar range, and it's really hard to have really good hands with a polar range. Especially if you have a kicker that blocks their value. So, for example, ace 10 on king 10 or queen 10 on the king 10-4. Excuse me, we are blocking king, queen, and ace king. And because they're using a small sizing and the fact that they're only betting with like king, queen or better, or sometimes only ace, king or better because they don't bet thin for value, I hope I'm getting this point across of how you can just call more second and third pairs that have a blocker to their stronger hands. Also an exploit, don't check raise bluff these players. You never want to raise into a polar range. So you want to check raise bluff on the river when people are betting thin for value, so you can get them to fold their thin value bets. But if they don't have any thin value bets, you're just folding out their bluffs and getting called by the top part of their range. So you should just call with a large portion of your range. You should only ever check raise if you're beating some of their value range. Exploit also is bet many weak. You should be betting really thin for value yourself. You should be betting many weak top pairs and strong second pairs for value because players are used to seeing these polar ranges on the river. People only bet polar, and they're not used to seeing thin value bets. And so they end up calling too much with like second or third pairs, like I recommend, but you should be doing that less against a player that's capable of making thin value bets. So you should be betting very thin for value yourself, and recognize people that aren't betting thin for value, and end up with polar ranges on the river. Finally, I wasn't sure if I was going to go over this or have time, so I didn't really have a slide for it, but I'll talk about it. Overvaluing tournament life. Players pass on way too large of plus EV situation in tournaments, especially late in tournaments, because of tournament life. And yes, ICM is a thing, but I'm talking too about like middle stages and stuff. They just greatly overestimate the how wide of EV situations you should be passing on. The better player you are, the more passive you can be in passing on marginal EV spots. But in general, your ROI, or your return on investment in a tournament, is based on you collecting a lot of EV throughout the tournament, and passing on too many plus EV spots is definitely going to negatively affect your tournament. And if like a great situation, players that like, I don't agree with everything they do in terms of like as a technical part of their game, but guys like Michael Mizrachi or Chino Reem, I think they make a lot of mistakes. The thing is their mistakes are always on the aggressive side, or always on the side where they're going to end up having a big stack. So they're not afraid to take races. They're not afraid to pull off big bluffs that they think are plus EV. They're not afraid to put themselves in these marginal spots, because when it works out, they have huge stacks and make deep runs. And it's okay to have a lower cash rate, but a higher, you're going to make it deeper into tournaments. And so I think people are just getting over the being scared to bust out of tournaments is kind of what I'm getting at here. And especially in live tournaments, where it's like you've traveled to the casino, you're there, maybe it's the only tournament you're going to play. People are scared to bust out of tournaments, when in reality, you're going to bust out and not cash 80% of the time anyways. So the quicker you can get over the fear of busting out of tournaments, the quicker your tournament game is going to improve, because you're going to be building bigger stacks or busting out, which is much better for your ROI. As an exploit, you can punish players afraid to take races by rejamming aggressively or 3-betting them aggressively until they adjust. They will continue to overfold, waiting for strong hands. That's kind of the basic exploit, and why the best tournament players are often the most aggressive ones, because they are taking advantage of this a lot for people. Reading a question here. So David said, I was in a tournament this past weekend that was live streamed. I watched it later, and I can't believe what people folded my 3-bet jams when they were put all in. Folding small to mid pairs with like 8 big blinds. Yeah, and the best example I can find of this is watch live stream tournaments and just watch the crazy folds you see going on late in tournaments. And my personal kind of theory, or how I look at tournament poker in a way, is I don't do a lot of bluffing or crazy stuff early on in the tournament. And the reason is there's no pressure on people. And when there's no pressure on people, they don't overfold. And so early on, people are often, they call more than they should. They underfold. And so my adjustment there is like, I just, play pretty tight early on, and I'm not doing a lot of crazy bluffing. But late in tournaments, there's a lot of pressure, because there's big money now at play. You're playing way bigger stakes than you normally play. So if you buy into a $300 tournament and you make the final table, and first place is $30,000 and 10th place is $3,000, you're playing the equivalent of like I don't know the exact, but like a $5,000 or $6,000 sit and go now. And so you signed up for a $300 tournament, and now you're playing a $5,000 sit and go. So people, when you add pressure, people make mistakes. And the mistake they often make is they overfold. And they in general play way too passive. And that's why you see the really good players playing very aggressively late, and in general picking up a lot of chips and winning and finishing top 3 way more often. Appreciate it, David. Thanks for the comment. I appreciate the compliment. Taylor, yeah, go bananas. That's I've been using that word a lot, and really, you should just going bananas. And it's okay to. The main thing here over value in tournament life, I mean, it's okay to bust out of a tournament, and it's okay to like, especially try to make your mistakes on the aggressive side, because two things can happen then. One, you double up, okay, and two, they can fold and you win pots. So there's two ways you win the pot, and both of those mistakes lead to you getting bigger stacks. Versus if you make passive mistakes like folding in situations too much or calling off, stuff, they end up with you not making as many chips. And so when you call off, the only way you can win the pot is by making the best hand. So get over that fear of busting out of tournaments. And the other one here is don't be afraid to look stupid. And you're going to happen. You're going to look stupid, and who cares? Use it as like an image thing. Now, like, you're going to get paid off later, especially if you're in a cash game, and like if you play cash games regularly with a bunch of people, you can make the biggest minus EV decision once and like just stack off in the stupidest spot. You're going to get paid off for the next 5 years if you play. This is why I'm not playing this to tournaments. If you play with the same group of people all the time, they're going to remember that one time, and you're just going to get like so much more action later and stuff. So, thank you, Jason. Appreciate the comment. Thank you, Gene. I appreciate it. Glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, that's all I got for you guys. Any questions, fire them in. I'm happy to answer questions for a few minutes. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Lewis. Any questions before we wrap this up? Perfect. Seems like that's all good. Thank you, everyone. Where will this video be? This should get uploaded to the website. Spencer, yeah, this should be updated on the website. It should be on Poker Coaching. I would assume. I'm not in charge of that. I do the webinar. I think this one is only for members. This isn't like an advertising one. The ones that they put on YouTube they used to put them on YouTube to try to build the base kind of as like a free trial. But now the replays are only available to members. So we're not putting up this content on YouTube. That's not fair to you guys that are paying for it. So, yeah, so go ahead and rewatch it, and you can take notes on that, Spencer. So Lewis asked, what hands would you call a 3-bet from a nit with? Small pairs, suited connectors, and less medium suited connector hands? Exactly. So against a nit, I'm more likely to fold a hand like Queen Jack suited, but call with 7-6 suited, because the Queen Jack suited has two things going against it. One, it's dominated by hands like Ace Queen, Pocket Queens, Pocket Jacks, Pocket Kings, Pocket Aces. The other thing is, too, yeah, it can make straights and flushes, but the straights, the cards you need, your opponent has in their hands. So if your opponent's only 3-betting Pocket 10s or better, and you have Queen Jack suited, he has outs that you need to make a straight. So you never really have a clean 8 outs, let's say, if the flop comes 9, 10, something, because there's a good chance your opponent has at least one king, maybe 2 kings in their range, and so you have less outs. So yeah, call with the small pairs, call with the smaller suited connectors, ones that don't connect with their range, and your outs are all clean. Yeah, this one was only for premium members, I'm fairly confident about. Cool, guys. Sounds good. Any topics that you guys want me to cover in my next premium webinar? Anything that you want? Anything that you want me to cover in the next premium webinar, let me know. I'll hang around for a second, see if you guys want to type that into the chat now. Other than that, I will see you guys next week. And yeah, thanks everyone for showing up. I appreciate it.